"Ma'am, passengers like you don't belong on this aircraft." The sentence drifted across the quiet private terminal with the kind of confidence that only someone certain they would never be questioned could summon. For one suspended heartbeat, even the polished marble floor seemed to absorb the silence that followed. A pair of pilots exchanged an uneasy glance near the cockpit entrance. A baggage attendant stopped rolling a cart. The low hum of a luxury jet's auxiliary engine continued in the background, steady and indifferent, while every set of eyes slowly turned toward the woman standing alone at the bottom of the boarding stairs. Maya Brooks didn't answer immediately. She simply looked down at the boarding pass, still resting calmly between her fingers before lifting her eyes to meet the flight attendant's unwavering stare. She wore a simple navy cardigan over a charcoal dress, comfortable walking shoes, and carried one weathered leather tote that had clearly traveled many miles. There were no designer logos, no expensive jewelry, no security detail, no assistant announcing her arrival. Nothing about her appearance fit the image Emily Carter believed a private jet passenger should have. Emily adjusted the silk scarf around her neck and offered a practiced smile that somehow managed to sound colder than the early morning breeze sweeping across the runway. "Commercial flights leave from the other terminal," she said politely enough for anyone listening to mistake courtesy for kindness. "This aircraft is reserved for invited guests." Maya glanced toward the gleaming Gulf Stream waiting only a few yards away. The morning sun reflected across its white fuselage, painting ribbons of gold across the windows. She had flown aboard dozens of aircraft over the years, but today she wished the trip could simply be quiet. Less than 12 hours earlier, she had stood beneath gray skies saying goodbye to her mother, whose final request had been painfully simple. "Never let another person's bitterness steal your peace." Those words still echoed gently inside Maya's heart as she inhaled the scent of jet fuel mixing with fresh spring air. "I believe this is my flight," she answered softly, extending her boarding confirmation without the slightest hint of frustration. Emily barely glanced at it. "These documents are checked inside after verified guests board," she replied. "You'll need to step aside." Behind Emily, a young first officer shifted his weight uncomfortably. Something about the exchange felt wrong, but years of hierarchy had taught him when silence was safer than questions. Several members of the ground crew lowered their voices, pretending not to watch while quietly watching everything. Maya remained perfectly still. There was no anger in her face, only an expression shaped by years of learning that dignity often spoke louder than outrage. She had spent most of her life walking into rooms where people decided who she was before hearing a single word she had to say. Today felt strangely familiar. Emily folded her arms. "I'm trying to save you from embarrassing yourself," she continued. "Private aviation has certain standards." The words landed harder than she intended, hanging in the crisp morning air like invisible frost. Maya's fingers tightened ever so slightly around the folded boarding confirmation before relaxing again. She could have ended the misunderstanding with one phone call, one name, one title. Instead, she quietly asked, "Would you mind checking the reservation first?" Emily let out a restrained laugh that drew the attention of another crew member stepping onto the stairs above. "There's nothing to check," she answered. "I already know who our client is." None of them noticed the black SUV turning slowly through the security gate in the distance, its tinted windows reflecting the rising sun as it rolled silently toward the aircraft. Maya lowered her hand without the slightest sign of resentment and carefully slipped the boarding confirmation back into her leather tote. The gentle movement seemed almost out of place against the growing tension surrounding the aircraft. She had learned years ago that some moments could not be improved by speaking louder. They could only be revealed by waiting. A cool breeze drifted across the private apron, carrying the scent of rain left behind during the night. Beyond the runway, the first rays of sunlight spread slowly across the horizon, turning the clouds into soft shades of gold and amber. The morning looked peaceful, almost beautiful, despite the uncomfortable silence that lingered around the boarding stairs. Emily Carter mistook Maya's composure for hesitation. In her experience, people who wandered into the wrong terminal usually apologized, became flustered, or quietly walked away. Maya did none of those things. She simply stood with relaxed shoulders, her breathing slow and steady, as though she had nowhere else in the world she needed to be. That quiet confidence unsettled Emily far more than an argument ever could. Inside the cabin, polished walnut trim reflected the early sunlight through oversized windows. Fresh orchids rested on the dining table beside crystal glasses that had been arranged with mathematical precision. The cabin smelled faintly of fresh coffee, leather, and cedar, creating the calm atmosphere expected aboard an aircraft prepared for one of the airline's highest-value clients. Every detail had been inspected twice before dawn because today's passenger was considered exceptionally important, although very few employees had ever seen her photograph. Maya had requested something unusual when the reservation had been finalized weeks earlier. She had specifically instructed the charter department not to arrange photographers, greeting staff, executive welcomes, or luxury transportation. She preferred arriving like everyone else. Her late mother used to tell her that respect discovered naturally was always worth more than respect offered because of a title. Since the funeral the previous afternoon, those words had remained close to her heart. The leather tote resting against her side held little more than a notebook, a framed family photograph wrapped carefully inside a sweater, and a folder containing documents for a meeting scheduled later that afternoon in Chicago. It was supposed to be an ordinary business trip, one she almost canceled after losing the woman who had taught her that compassion could outlast any fortune. A younger gate coordinator quietly approached Emily and whispered, "Should we verify the reservation number one more time?" Emily barely turned her head. "There is no reason to waste everyone's time," she replied with quiet certainty. "The client has not arrived yet." The coordinator hesitated before nodding and stepping back, although uncertainty lingered across his face. Maya noticed the exchange, but said nothing. Instead, her eyes drifted toward the open cabin door where the morning light poured through the entrance like a warm invitation that somehow remained just out of reach. She remembered countless airports from years past, when she traveled beside her mother to visit schools, hospitals, and scholarship programs without reporters ever knowing they had been there. Her mother believed generosity lost part of its meaning when it demanded applause. Maya had inherited that belief completely. Behind the aircraft, the black sport utility vehicle rolled to a smooth stop beside the operations building. A gray-haired man wearing the airline's executive badge stepped out quickly, glanced toward the boarding stairs, and the color quietly disappeared from his face as he recognized the woman who was still waiting patiently beneath the morning sun. The executive standing beside the black sport utility vehicle did not run. Years of leadership had taught Daniel Whitmore that panic rarely solved anything, yet every instinct urged him to move faster. His polished shoes carried him across the quiet pavement while his eyes remained fixed on Maya Brooks. He recognized her immediately, not because she sought attention, but because he had personally reviewed the confidential charter agreement only 2 days earlier. The reservation had not come through an assistant or a corporate travel office. It had come directly from Maya herself with one unusual instruction repeated twice in writing. "Please treat every passenger exactly the same, regardless of appearance." Daniel remembered smiling when he first read those words. Now they echoed through his mind with painful clarity. Halfway across the apron, he noticed Emily still standing confidently at the foot of the stairs, speaking to another crew member as though nothing unusual had happened. She had built an impressive reputation over 8 years with the airline. Her customer satisfaction scores ranked among the highest in the company. She anticipated every request before passengers voiced it, remembered names, favorite beverages, and travel habits with remarkable precision. Managers praised her professionalism during every performance review. Yet there was one weakness no report had ever measured. Emily quietly believed wealth had a uniform. She trusted expensive watches more than warm smiles, tailored suits more than patient eyes, and polished appearances more than simple introductions. Whenever she saw someone who did not match her private definition of success, invisible assumptions filled the empty spaces before facts ever could. No supervisor had witnessed those moments because they happened in subtle conversations, polite expressions, and carefully chosen words that sounded courteous on the surface while carrying quiet judgment underneath. This morning, standing beneath the growing warmth of the rising sun, she remained convinced she was protecting an exclusive experience reserved for elite travelers. She never imagined she had mistaken dignity for deception. Daniel slowed his pace as he approached, trying to understand exactly how far the misunderstanding had gone before making matters even worse. Around them, the atmosphere had changed almost imperceptibly. The ground crew no longer pretended to be busy. A fuel technician stood beside the service truck holding a clipboard without turning a page. The first officer remained inside the cabin doorway, watching through the reflection on the polished handrail. Even the wind seemed softer now, carrying only the distant cry of gulls circling beyond the runway. Maya noticed Daniel approaching long before Emily did. She offered him the same calm expression she had given everyone else that morning. There was no accusation in her eyes, only quiet patience shaped by a lifetime of choosing grace over resentment. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He remembered attending a charity event years earlier where Maya's mother had spoken about character. Respect is revealed most clearly when nobody important appears to be watching. At the time, he thought it was simply a beautiful sentence. Standing on the tarmac now, he understood it was also a warning. Emily finally turned toward the approaching executive and smiled with complete confidence, expecting praise for protecting a private charter from an unauthorized visitor. Instead, she saw concern written across Daniel Whitmore's face, and for the first time that morning, certainty gave way to confusion. Daniel Whitmore stopped only a few feet from Maya, drawing one careful breath before speaking. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks." His voice carried none of the polished confidence executives often used in public. Instead, it held unmistakable concern. Maya greeted him with a gentle nod. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Emily's smile faded almost instantly. She looked from Daniel to Maya and back again, trying to fit the scene into a version of reality that still made sense. "You know her?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Daniel turned slowly toward her. "Yes, Emily, I do." The words were calm, but they settled over the tarmac with unexpected weight. A quiet stillness spread among the crew. Nobody reached for luggage. Nobody climbed the boarding stairs. Even the engines seemed strangely distant beneath the growing silence. Emily recovered quickly enough to straighten her posture. "She approached the aircraft without authorization," she explained. "I was simply following protocol." Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he extended an open hand toward Maya. "May I see your boarding confirmation?" Maya placed the document into his hand without hesitation. He unfolded the page, glanced at the reservation number, then looked down once more at the signature beneath the charter agreement. Every detail matched perfectly. The aircraft registration, the departure time, the destination, the special service request. There was no mistake. Daniel closed the folder carefully before returning it to Maya with both hands, a gesture of respect that did not escape anyone watching. Emily felt the confidence she had carried all morning begin slipping away. "Is there a problem?" she asked quietly. Daniel met her eyes. "There is." He paused just long enough for the silence to speak before continuing. "Ms. Brooks is the passenger who chartered this entire flight." Nobody moved. The young first officer standing inside the cabin lowered his gaze. The baggage attendant slowly released the handle of the luggage cart. One member of the ground crew quietly removed his cap without realizing he had done so. Emily stared at Maya as though she were seeing her for the first time. The simple cardigan, the comfortable shoes, the weathered leather tote. None of it resembled the picture she had built inside her own mind of success, and yet every assumption she had trusted now collapsed without a single raised voice. "There has to be some misunderstanding," Emily whispered. "The client profile," Daniel interrupted gently. The client specifically requested that no photographs be attached to the reservation. His eyes drifted briefly toward Maya before returning to Emily. She also requested that every employee treat every passenger with equal respect, regardless of appearance. Those words landed far heavier than any formal reprimand could have. Maya remained completely still, her expression unchanged. She did not look satisfied. She did not look offended. If anything, she appeared quietly saddened that the morning had unfolded exactly as it had. Daniel noticed it too. That disappointed him more than the mistake itself. He had spent years helping build an airline that promised every traveler dignity from the moment they arrived until the moment they reached home. Standing beneath the bright morning sky, he wondered how many smaller moments had passed unnoticed because nobody important appeared to be watching. Maya looked toward the open cabin door, where warm sunlight spilled across the polished wood floor inside the aircraft. Then she turned back to Daniel and spoke with remarkable calm. "Before we continue," she said softly, "I would like to ask one simple question. If I had not been your client today, would anything about this conversation have been different?" Daniel did not answer right away. The question lingered in the cool morning air, settling over the private terminal with a weight that no policy manual could carry. He looked toward the runway where sunlight shimmered across the concrete, then slowly lowered his eyes. Years of experience had taught him how to solve scheduling conflicts, weather delays, and mechanical emergencies, but there was no operational procedure for a failure of character. Finally, he spoke with complete honesty. "I hoped the answer would be no, but after what I have witnessed this morning, I cannot say that with certainty." His admission surprised everyone standing nearby. Emily felt her throat tighten. She had expected correction, perhaps even embarrassment, but not quiet truth. Maya studied Daniel for a brief moment before giving a small nod. She appreciated honesty, even when it arrived too late to prevent harm. "Thank you," she said gently. "That is the first truthful answer I have heard today." Emily took one hesitant step forward. The confidence that had filled her voice only minutes earlier had disappeared completely. "Ms. Brooks," she began, "I did not know who you were." Maya turned toward her, her expression calm but thoughtful. "That is exactly the problem," she replied. "Respect should never depend on knowing who someone is." The words were spoken softly, without anger or accusation, yet they echoed through the silence with unmistakable clarity. Nobody looked away. The young first officer quietly removed his cap and held it against his side. The gate coordinator stared down at the tablet in his hands without seeing the screen. Even the breeze seemed to fade, leaving only the distant sound of another aircraft climbing into the bright blue sky. Emily searched for another explanation, another sentence that might somehow repair what had already happened, but every thought dissolved before reaching her lips. She remembered her years of training, the customer service seminars, the polished speeches about hospitality, and suddenly realized how easily routine had become assumption. She had not followed protocol that morning. She had followed prejudice disguised as experience. Daniel looked toward Maya once more. "The aircraft is ready whenever you are," he said quietly. Maya glanced at the open cabin door, but made no effort to board. Instead, she asked one more question. "How many employees are working today because they believe every passenger deserves equal dignity?" Daniel remained silent. He knew she was not asking for a number. She was asking about the culture his company claimed to represent. The answer could not be measured by attendance sheets or employee handbooks. It would be measured by moments exactly like this one. Maya slowly reached into her leather tote and removed a neatly folded envelope. She handed it to Daniel without ceremony. "This contains the documents for the partnership meeting scheduled in Chicago this afternoon," she explained. "My foundation has spent 6 months evaluating whether your airline truly reflects the values written in its public commitments." Daniel accepted the envelope carefully, suddenly aware that it felt much heavier than paper should. Maya looked once across the gleaming aircraft, then toward the employees gathered around the boarding stairs. Her eyes rested briefly on Emily before she offered a quiet, almost sorrowful smile. "Sometimes," she said, "the most expensive losses begin with the smallest moments that everyone else believes will be forgotten." Edit. The morning flight departed nearly an hour behind schedule, yet nobody inside the cabin spoke much during the climb. Maya sat quietly beside the large oval window, watching the blanket of white clouds stretch endlessly beneath the wings. The familiar sound of the engines usually brought her peace, but today every gentle vibration seemed to carry the weight of a question she wished she had never needed to ask. On the small table beside her rested the framed photograph of her mother, still wrapped carefully inside the soft gray sweater she had packed after the funeral. She unfolded the fabric just enough to see the warm smile that had guided her through every difficult season of life. "People will always show you who they are when they believe there is nothing to gain," her mother used to say. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, allowing those words to settle inside her heart like sunlight finding its way through a cloudy sky. Back at the private terminal, the atmosphere felt entirely different after the aircraft disappeared beyond the horizon. No one hurried to speak. Employees quietly returned equipment to storage, but conversations remained unusually short. The polished boarding stairs stood empty, reflecting the bright morning light across the concrete. Emily remained near the entrance long after everyone else drifted back toward their duties. She replayed every sentence she had spoken, hearing each one more clearly now than when she had first said it. None of them sounded cruel when they left her mouth. Yet together they had built a wall that should never have existed. Daniel Whitmore carried the sealed envelope into the executive conference room without stopping at his office. The building overlooking the private terminal usually buzzed with confident conversations by 8 o'clock each morning, but today an uneasy stillness filled the hallways. He placed the envelope in the center of the polished walnut table before carefully unfolding the documents inside. They were not contracts waiting to be signed. They were evaluation reports. For 6 months, Maya Brooks Foundation had quietly studied the airline's culture, customer experience, employee training, and public commitments concerning fairness, inclusion, and dignity. Every page reflected extraordinary attention to detail. Anonymous observations, passenger interviews, service evaluations, leadership assessments. At the bottom of the final page appeared one handwritten sentence. Character is revealed when no one believes they are being evaluated. Daniel leaned back slowly, removing his glasses as the realization settled over him. This morning had never been an isolated misunderstanding. It had become the final piece of evidence. Outside his office window, another aircraft taxied toward the runway under a cloudless spring sky. Everything looked normal from a distance. Travelers continued arriving. Luggage continued moving. Engines continued roaring into the air. Yet inside the executive offices, the silence carried far greater weight than any announcement over the public address system. Emily sat alone in the crew lounge with an untouched cup of coffee growing cold beside her. She stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her tablet, barely recognizing the confident professional she had believed herself to be only a few hours earlier. For the first time in many years, she was not thinking about promotions, performance scores, or prestigious assignments. She was thinking about one quiet woman who had answered humiliation with patience and one simple question that refused to leave her mind. If respect only appeared after someone became important, had it ever truly been respect at all? By sunrise the following morning, the first financial alerts began arriving before most executives had even finished their coffee. Daniel Whitmore stood alone inside the executive conference room as notification after notification illuminated the large screen mounted on the wall. One investment partner had suspended negotiations pending an internal review. Another requested immediate clarification regarding the airline's commitment to equal treatment. A third simply sent a brief message that carried more weight than several legal documents combined. Trust takes years to build and seconds to lose. Daniel slowly lowered the tablet onto the polished table. He had spent decades studying balance sheets, market forecasts, and operational risks, but no spreadsheet had ever prepared him for the cost of a single moment of misplaced judgment. Within hours, the company's stock had slipped noticeably as analysts questioned whether the incident reflected a deeper cultural problem. Several institutional investors postponed meetings that had been scheduled months in advance. The projected value of delayed agreements quickly climbed into the millions of dollars. Yet inside Daniel's mind, the greatest loss could not be measured in dollars at all. It was the realization that the airline had failed the very principle it proudly advertised on every aircraft and every website page. Across the city, Maya arrived at the Foundation headquarters overlooking the Chicago River. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, filling the lobby with warm reflections that danced across the marble floor. Her assistant greeted her with a quiet smile before placing a folder on the conference table. "The board is waiting whenever you are ready," she said softly. Maya nodded, but remained standing near the window for another moment. Below, people hurried along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups, backpacks, and briefcases, each person invisible to someone else for reasons they would never know. She wondered how many of them had already been judged before saying their first word that morning. The board meeting began without fanfare. Around the table sat educators, veterans, physicians, nonprofit leaders, and business executives representing the Foundation's scholarship and investment programs. Maya listened carefully as Daniel's evaluation report appeared on the presentation screen. No one interrupted. No one rushed to conclusions. Finally, one trustee folded his hands and asked quietly, "Did the airline fail because one employee made a mistake, or because the culture allowed the mistake to happen? The room became still. Maya answered with the same calm voice that had remained steady since the private terminal. People rarely reveal an organization's values during rehearsed presentations. They reveal them during ordinary moments when they believe no one important is watching. The trustees exchanged thoughtful glances before recording their final decision. The strategic partnership would not move forward. Instead, the investment would remain suspended until the airline demonstrated meaningful changes through independent review and measurable action rather than public promises. The decision alone represented millions of dollars in postponed opportunities. Back at headquarters, Daniel received the official letter only minutes later. He read every page carefully before closing the folder with a slow breath. There was no anger in Maya's words, no demand for punishment, and no attempt to embarrass anyone publicly. Instead, every sentence focused on responsibility, accountability, and the possibility of becoming better. Daniel looked through the conference room window toward the runway where another aircraft lifted gracefully into the bright blue sky. For the first time since the company had been founded, he understood that the strongest test of leadership was never protecting a reputation. It was earning back the trust that had quietly slipped away. 3 days later, Daniel Whitmore stepped through the glass doors of the Maya Brooks Foundation carrying nothing except a slim folder and a quiet sense of responsibility. There were no attorneys beside him, no public relations advisors, no photographers waiting outside the building. He had insisted on coming alone. The receptionist welcomed him with a polite smile before guiding him toward a conference room overlooking the Chicago River. Soft afternoon sunlight reflected across the water, filling the room with warm light that seemed to soften even the hardest thoughts. Maya entered a few moments later wearing the same quiet confidence she carried everywhere she went. She greeted Daniel with a handshake that was respectful but reserved. Neither of them hurried to sit down. For a brief moment, they simply looked through the windows at the boats drifting slowly across the river below. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I came here to apologize, not because we lost an investment, but because we lost sight of the values we claimed to represent." Maya listened without interrupting. His voice carried none of the polished confidence she had heard from countless executives over the years. It sounded sincere, shaped by difficult reflection rather than careful preparation. Daniel continued. "Emily asked if she could come with me today. I told her this conversation belonged to me first. Leadership means accepting responsibility before asking anyone else to do the same." Maya slowly nodded. "That is true," she replied softly. Daniel opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. "These are not proposals to restore our partnership," he explained. "They are the changes we have already begun." Maya looked through the pages one by one. Independent cultural audits. Anonymous employee reporting channels. Mandatory hospitality training centered on dignity instead of appearance. New evaluation standards measuring respect shown during ordinary interactions instead of only customer satisfaction scores. Scholarships designed to expand opportunity for underserved aviation students. None of the documents mentioned restoring the suspended investment. Every page focused instead on changing behavior. Maya closed the folder carefully. "This is a beginning," she said. Daniel lowered his eyes. "I know it is not enough." The room became comfortably quiet. Outside, sunlight shimmered across the river as a gentle breeze stirred the trees lining the waterfront. After several moments, another soft knock came at the conference room door. Emily Carter stepped inside. Her uniform had been replaced by simple business clothes, making her appear almost like a different person. She paused near the entrance before looking directly at Maya. "I have replayed that morning every day," she said quietly. "I kept telling myself that I made one mistake, but eventually I realized it was not one mistake. It was years of assumptions that I never questioned." Her eyes glistened, yet her voice remained steady. "You showed me more grace than I deserved. Thank you for giving me the chance to see what I had refused to see." Maya stood and walked toward her. The silence between them carried no anger now, only honesty. "I cannot erase what happened," Maya said gently. "Neither can you. But every passenger you meet from this day forward will tell the next chapter of your story." Emily nodded slowly. Tears slipped quietly down her face as understanding finally replaced shame. Maya offered a warm smile before extending her hand once more. "People grow when they choose humility over pride. I believe that choice is still in front of you." Emily accepted the handshake with both hands, not because forgiveness erased the past, but because it gave the future a chance to become something better. 6 months later, the private terminal looked almost exactly the same, yet everything important had changed. Morning sunlight spilled across the polished floor, painting long reflections beneath the tall glass windows while travelers quietly checked their watches and carried small bags toward waiting aircraft. The familiar scent of fresh coffee drifted through the lounge as the distant sound of engines rolled gently across the airfield. It felt like any ordinary day, and perhaps that was the greatest sign of all. Real change rarely arrived with applause. It arrived in ordinary moments repeated faithfully until they became part of everyday life. Emily Carter stood near the boarding entrance, welcoming passengers one by one with the same warmth she offered every person who approached. She no longer searched for expensive watches or designer luggage before offering a smile. Instead, she looked people in the eyes, greeted them by name whenever possible, and listened before making assumptions. New employees often noticed the quiet sincerity in her voice without ever knowing the reason behind it. During orientation sessions, she volunteered to teach one lesson personally. She never mentioned headlines, financial losses, or public embarrassment. She simply told every new flight attendant that the most important document they would ever carry was not a passenger manifest, but their own character. Respect, she reminded them, should never require proof of status. Daniel Whitmore watched one of those training sessions from the back of the room without interrupting. The airline had completed every independent recommendation requested by the Maya Brooks Foundation. Anonymous evaluations had improved. Passenger trust steadily returned. Months of patient work slowly repaired what one careless morning had nearly broken. The suspended partnership had not been restored immediately, nor had anyone expected it to be. Trust returned the same way it was earned, one honest choice at a time. Late that afternoon, another familiar black sport utility vehicle rolled quietly toward the private terminal. Maya stepped out carrying the same weathered leather tote she had brought months earlier. The cardigan had changed, but her gentle smile had not. She was traveling to visit a scholarship program for young aviation students, many of whom dreamed of becoming pilots, mechanics, engineers, and flight attendants. Emily noticed her almost immediately. Their eyes met across the terminal, and for a brief moment neither woman spoke. Then Emily walked forward with calm confidence and offered a genuine smile. "Welcome back, Ms. Brooks. We are honored to have you with us today." Maya returned the smile warmly. "Thank you, Emily." There was no awkwardness left between them, only quiet understanding built through difficult truth and patient growth. As Maya accepted her boarding pass, she noticed a young family approaching behind her. Without hesitation, Emily greeted them with the same kindness she had just shown Maya, helping the grandparents, speaking gently with the children, and treating every traveler with equal care. Maya watched for only a second before turning toward the aircraft. That single moment told her everything she needed to know. Some victories were never announced in newspapers or measured on financial reports. They lived inside small decisions that changed the lives of strangers who would never know the story behind them. As the aircraft lifted into the bright blue sky, sunlight poured through the cabin window and rested quietly across the framed photograph of Maya's mother lying inside her leather tote. Maya closed her eyes and smiled softly. Her mother's final lesson had become someone else's new beginning. Above the clouds, where the noise of the world faded into peaceful silence, kindness had once again proven that it was never weakness. It had always been the strongest force in the room.